How's it going, you excellent bunch of bakers? Welcome back to the channel. In today's video, I'll show you how to make a beautiful leaf-shaped French bread called fougasse. So let's get in the kitchen and get started. Fougasse is kind of like focaccia, but with a nice and deliberate leaf-shaped design. It originates in France, and we have already made 3 of these beautiful breads on this channel already. But that was way back in the day, before I stopped kneading and started cold fermenting. So it is time to update this beautiful recipe as well. We'll be using simple ingredients and an easy method, and we'll get a beautiful looking, soft and super flavorful bread. And even better still, I will include an extra recipe at the end of this video. So let's just get to it. Let me show you how it's done. Starting with the ingredients. We need some white bread flour, whole wheat flour, yeast, salt, olive oil, some chopped olives and some water. When it comes to the equipment, we don't need much. A tray with some non-stick paper, a bowl, scales, a dough scraper and a temperature probe. Alternatively, you could slide your fougasse in the oven using a pizza paddle and bake it on a baking steel or on a baking stone, but a tray with some baking paper works just fine, so that's what I'm going to use. Let's get right into it, starting with temperature control. My kitchen is around 23 degrees Celsius or 73 degrees Fahrenheit, and the water that I'm using is about the same temperature. At 22 degrees Celsius or 72 degrees Fahrenheit. The dough will warm up naturally by a couple of degrees as we mix it. To make the dough, combine the water, the yeast, the salt, the whole wheat flour, the olive oil and the chopped olives. Then give it all a good mix. You want to dissolve the salt completely and disperse the ingredients nice and evenly. Get rid of any lumps in the flour. You can use a spatula, a spoon or a whisk, it's up to you. Finally, add the white bread flour, grab your dough scraper and mix it to a dough. As ever, I'm aiming for a final dough temperature of around 24 degrees Celsius or 75 degrees Fahrenheit. This dough will be cold fermented, but you can ferment your dough at room temperature if you want to. I have left the instructions for that in the written recipe below. Just keep in mind that cold fermentation will produce superior flavor. After a quick temperature check, pop the dough in the fridge to cool down for 30 minutes. 30 minutes later, remove the dough from the fridge and give it a fold. I wanted to keep my table clean, so I decided to fold the dough up in the air. Wet your hands on your dough scraper with water. Release the dough from the bowl, then pick it up, fold the sides of the dough down and then back up into the center. And keep turning the dough as you do this. Alternatively, you can dust the dough with flour and fold it on the table. Once it feels nice and tight, place it back into the bowl, cover it up and place it back into the fridge for the long cold fermentation of around 18 to 24 hours. You can of course take it out sooner and leave it in there for longer. Cold fermentation is quite forgiving. Okay, it is the next day, the dough is looking nice and bubbly. We can move on to the pre-shaping step. Dust the dough with flour, release it from the bowl, then pick it up and fold it into a nice tight ball, just like we did previously. I'm using flour instead of water this time because I don't want the dough ball to be sticky. Once it feels nice and tight, place it on a floured surface so it doesn't stick to it, cover it up, leave it to ferment for 1 hour. This is kind of like a combination between the resting and the final proofing stage for this dough. The dough must relax sufficiently in order for us to be able to shape it. I have split the final shaping step into 2 parts. First, we'll dust the dough with flour generously, release it from the table and then pat it out to an oval shape. Then we'll place it on the non-stick paper lined baking tray, cover it up and leave it to proof for another 30 minutes. Once it has fully proofed, we'll score it and bake it. The reason why I split the final shaping up into 2 parts with the fermentation stage in between is that I didn't want to deflate the dough too much. It's already almost stretched out to where it should be. Now it will rise a bit more and then we'll score it, and it should retain most of its gas. During the final proof, preheat the oven to 210 degrees Celsius or 410 degrees Fahrenheit, fan on. If your oven doesn't have a fan, go for 230 degrees Celsius or 445 degrees Fahrenheit. Okay, my dough is puffed up, the oven is hot. Let's give it that classic shape and bake it. And it couldn't be easier. All we need to do is dust the dough lightly with flour and then use our dough scraper to score it. Place a couple of cuts or 1 long cut down the middle and then a few diagonal cuts coming in from the sides. After cutting the dough, you want to pick it up and stretch the cuts open. Be aware of the fact that this bread will have quite a large footprint. We're only using about 250 grams or half a pound of flour, yet my largest baking tray is just about big enough to fit this dough. Okay, once you have placed all your cuts and stretched out the dough, and once you're happy with the design, give it a good spritz of water and they'll be ready for baking. If you don't have a water spray bottle, you can bake this bread as is, it'll be just fine. But definitely get yourself a water spray bottle. It is a great bread making tool. Right, let's get this puppy in the oven. It'll take around 20 minutes to fully bake. Once it's golden brown all over, it's ready. If you are unlucky enough to have an oven like mine, which doesn't have a heating element at the bottom, then double check the bottom of the bread if it's fully baked or not. You may want to flip it over and give it a couple more minutes. I didn't have to do that this time, because I keep my baking steel in the oven and I place the tray on a baking steel, which acts as a heating element. I like to brush this bread with olive oil once it comes out of the oven. It gives it a beautiful shine, completely transforming the look of it, and it makes it taste even better. And there you have it. That's how you make a beautiful, soft and flavorful fougasse with olives. But I did say that I have 2 recipes for you. So let's make another one right now. In this version, instead of whole wheat flour, I'm using whole grain rye flour. I've left out the olives and instead I've added caraway seeds. This will be an Eastern European fougasse. The method is exactly the same. I mixed the dough, I left it in the fridge to cool down for 30 minutes, I gave it a fold, I left it cold ferment for 18 to 24 hours. I took it out of the fridge on the next day, dusted it with flour, shaped it into a tight ball, left it to ferment for 1 hour, then flattened it out. I've covered it, left it to ferment for 30 minutes, and now it's ready to be scored. I must admit I went a little bit crazy with this design. The funny thing that happens to me quite often is that I would imagine something in my head. Once I start doing it, it turns out completely different. And more often than not, it's just me being too confident. This bread looked completely different in my head, but it turned out looking like something from an alien movie. The good thing is that there are no rules. You can cut your fougasse in any way you like. And even if it looks funny, weird, or absolutely perfect, it'll still taste the same. The one good thing about fougasse is that it almost always looks better once it's baked, as was the case with my crazy design. And yes, this is baked at the same temperature for the same amount of time as the previous bread. And I also brushed this one with olive oil once it came out of the oven. And after the application of olive oil, it ended up looking incredible. This is far from the design I was going for, but I'm still super happy with it. And it tastes great and has a super nice texture. Caraway and rye just work wonders together. Made even better with the olive oil in the background. And the interior of this bread is so soft. It can be eaten by itself, or with a dip, or it could be part of meze. This thing will be best consumed fresh. Flatbreads like these with a high crust to crumb ratio will stale quite quickly. So ideally, you want to consume it soon after baking. Don't forget to check out more flatbread recipes in the Flatbreads and Crackers playlist. Thank you so much for watching, I'll see you in the next one.